Welcome to There's a Method to the Madness. My name is Rob Maxwell, and I'm an exercise physiologist and personal trainer. I'm the owner of Maxwell's Fitness Programs, and I've been in business since 1994. Today's episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about some more sports psychology, and the theme is that we do not rise to the occasion, we sink to our level of training. I heard that is a military philosophy, and I'm going to talk about that in regards to our training, and I so believe in that. Before we get into that, let me thank our sponsors, Jonathan and Lynn Gilden at the Gilden Group at Realty Pros. They're absolutely the best. It's summertime, it's time to sell, it's time to buy. I really don't know, but you know what? I know they do. So they're the ones to contact. If you need any help with your real estate needs, please give them a shout at thegildengroup.com. Very easy to find, gildengroup.com. Okay, let's get into today's topic, which actually I'm excited about. I've been thinking about, I've been meaning to get this podcast done because it's something that I really believe is so true. Okay, so let me repeat it again. We do not rise up to the occasion. We sink to the level of our training. Again, that is a military philosophy. I heard it on a podcast being talked about in different regards, of course, than fitness, although fitness is a big part of their training as well. And it is so true regarding physical fitness. It's so true regarding sports and athletics. And we need to talk a little bit about it, I think. You know, too often we'll hear somebody say, or there's this, belief that, oh, well, you know what? I'll get my game on when it counts. I'm really going to, rise up. I tend to be a clutch type player, or so-and-so's a clutch type player. He's great in the clutch and all this. And there's some truth to that, meaning when we're talking about like professional athletes in baseball or football or basketball, guys that can hit clutch free throws, guys that can hit the clutch pass for a touchdown in the fourth quarter, like, Tom Brady, Joe Montana, Dan Marino, guys like that were clutch. Guys that can get up to the plate and get that base hit. I always think of Derek Jeter, people like that back in the day. Ted Williams was always able to get on base. I had to, balance it out because I don't want to be a homie here and, not include a Red Sox, because there's obviously great players in every sport on every team. But yeah, so there's truth to that clutch factor, but that's a little bit different. Some people are able to perform with the spotlights on because they have less anxiety levels, or they're able to control what we call in sports psychology their arousal levels. They're able to control it. But at the same time, if they weren't well trained, if they didn't have a base in fitness, they're not going to, or not in fitness, but in regards to what we're talking about with these guys in their sport, they're not going to do what they need to do. I mean, sure, there are guys that have, ice water in their veins and you're just so clutch, absolutely true, and then some that tend to struggle. And again, the reason for that has, as far as when you're talking elites, has more to do with their psychology levels, their anxiety levels, their arousal levels. But these guys that are elites still have to have the skill, and they are doing countless practices in clutch situations. So there is some truth to the fact that some people are more clutch, but that's not really what this is about. This is about more like physical fitness training and things like that, endurance athletes or strength athletes, or anything in regards to more physical fitness and not as much skill per se, like baseball and basketball, football, golf, tennis, and all that, which require a great amount of skill, but they still have to be very well trained. Too often I'll hear people say, well, haven't been doing a lot of miles, but I think I'm going to be able to gut it out once I get into the event. Well, that's great and everything, but I'm still a big believer that we're going to sink back to our level of training. And by the way, you hear that statement, and maybe you have a tendency, I didn't, when I heard it, I didn't have a tendency to see or hear anything negative at all. Not at all. But you might think, well, you sink to your level of training. It's like, well, why is that a bad thing? If you're well trained, you're not going to sink very low at all. You're going to be able to handle whatever it is. So it's not a bad thing. It's not meant to be bad. It's meant to be, it is what it is. It's meant to be like the responsibility is on you. And if you want to do better, you have to be well trained. And there's really no such thing as I'm going to rise up to this. So let's say you have not put in very many miles on the road and you go to do a marathon, which, isn't the smartest idea, because your joints, bones, tendons, ligaments, all those good things have to be built up so they can handle this kind of load, and they can handle it if you train. But let's say you don't and you jump in because you have a certain amount of fitness level. I can guarantee you're going to regret that decision if you don't have a certain level of base training, because you are going to hurt. You are going to have a lot of discomfort in your joints. You're going to have discomfort in your muscles because your aerobic training is not where you want it to be. It's not going to be a very, very wise idea for you. So, but the person that is very well trained and has been training for this marathon for a long time, let's say 6 months, and they've been putting in their due diligence with their long runs on the weekend and their medium runs during the week, and they've really trained themselves. They went the appropriate pace, which for the most part is slower than you think, but they're putting in the miles and time, and they're leaving their ego at home. Come race day, I have a lot of faith in those people, and I will always tell them, look, just rely back on your training. You've already done this. You've literally already done this. When we did the Rock the Ridge, we had a couple injuries going into it, and sometimes that's a factor of kind of landing back on our training too, and I'll get into that in a second. But we had a couple injuries going in, but Ellen, not really coming from a running background, was really nervous about the distance, her leg of 11 miles. But since February or maybe even January, we've been ramping her up on her miles, and she had already done that. She had already completed that distance in training. So I just had to point out, you're good. Just rely back on what you've already accomplished. Just do what you've done, and you're going to be fine. And of course, that was the case. She said later on, it was like, well, that distance wasn't nearly as overwhelming as I was afraid it was going to be. And she would have had no issues at all if she didn't have the knee injury going into it, which, was obviously able to complete it, but still not in the way she wanted to because she had some knee pain. But was able to complete the distance because she had trained herself up to it, and that was the case with everybody in our group. So we fall back to our level of training. We just don't rise up. And there's a lot of people that complain about their performances in the health and fitness sports like triathlon, running, or powerlifting, and that there's all these factors that go into it. Let's take powerlifting, which is a little bit different, but powerlifters have to complete 3 lifts to be ideal. So they get 3 lifts to hit a certain lift, and they typically come in at a load that they know they can do relatively easy. And then typically everybody's got their own strategy, but again, that's where being well trained comes in, and not just thinking, oh, I'm going to do something I've never done before. I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So then their second lift will be like just under what they think they can do, but would still let them compete very, very well. And it's very intricate and very close, and these guys and gals get down to the ounces and pounds and kilos, like they know exactly what they want to do. And then if they complete that lift, then they go to their third lift, which is their goal that they wanted to do and they know they can do. So the deal with that, though, is if they mess that up and like on their first lift they get it, and their second lift they kind of bite off more than they can chew and they don't get it, they're done. They're stuck with having to use their first lift as their score. So that wasn't very smart, right? That's not sinking to their level of training. That's getting a little cocky and saying, well, I got this, now I'm going to try something I've never done before. And again, you sink back to your level of training, so that wasn't very thought out from a strategic standpoint. So those, so it's not just endurance stuff, it's weightlifting and powerlifting stuff too. And I'm sure, I don't have a lot of experience in the CrossFit world, but I know people that do. But it's pretty similar. Like they know what they can do, and sometimes they're a little bit caught off guard because certain CrossFit competitions do things that, like, they're in the dark, so to say, not literally, but they'll have an event where they're not exactly sure how it's going to go, and then they're told just beforehand and they have to prepare. So in a way, that's a great thing, because then these CrossFitters are so freaking prepared for everything. And like, if they're told, well, it's going to be a mystery, and it could be anything from pull-ups, burpees, to push press, to run, to ergometer on the rower, it could be any of those things. And if they're not prepared for, say, one of them, like let's say the run or the ergometer, and then all of a sudden the competition comes up, it's like, oh God, well, I'll just wing it. I'll be great on this erg, which anybody that's ever been on a rowing machine, a stationary rowing machine, knows, no, it takes technique and training to get it down. So that's a mistake. So the person that hammers through that round and does well has prepared themselves in all of those disciplines. So they have to go through it too. But the area I have the most experience with coaching and performing is in the realm of bodybuilding and triathlon and running. So, I know for sure that we are going to sink to our level of training, which can be absolutely a great thing. If somebody has put in all of the time that they know they're supposed to put in bodybuilding, for example, they've got their muscles as big and large as they can, and then they start to strip down and they get defined and they get their body fat levels where they want, so the muscles look good. They still have to put in a ton of training and time in practicing posing, because posing is something that's a skill and you really have to get good at it. And it's a lot harder than people think it is. Standing there and holding the isometric squeeze of, say, your abdominals, your quads, and your pecs at the same time, and you have to hold it and keep a smile on your face. And if you're not trained to do that, you end up looking like you're straining, and you make these goofy looks on your face, and you might be thinking, well, that shouldn't matter. It's like, well, shouldn't is one thing, but I can tell you from experiences, the judges care. They absolutely look at stuff like that. They want to see somebody who looks like they've really mastered their posing, and it's actually part of their scorecard judging, how well a person presents themselves. So that's all in the training. So if you've been putting in your hour a day posing, yes, that's what I said, an hour a day posing. Sometimes people do even more. And then that's a week or two in front of your contest. And then prior to that, you've been putting in your time on the bike or run to try to get your body fat down, and you've been doing that for months, and you've been dieting and doing all you need to do to be lean. You can pretty much get up on that stage and go, you know what? I'm as good as I'm gonna be. And when I sink to my level of training, I'm pretty good with it. But if you've been kind of like taking everything for granted, being a little bit arrogant, and I've seen that in the bodybuilding world, people that think, well, I've won this, I've won that, and then they come in and they actually look a little bit fat on stage because they overestimated themselves and they underestimated their competition. And then they leave with their tail between their legs because they didn't do as well as they wanted to. And that just comes down to, again, arrogance. And that's what this all boils down to. It's like, you want to have done everything that you can do going into something, because the ultimate deal is we're all supposed to be doing these types of things, I believe, to be more healthy and more fit. That's what it's about. Being better than we were yesterday. That's the important thing. If you're not getting better than you were yesterday, then why are you doing it? It really doesn't matter who you're competing against. I mean, you're only competing against yourself. I mean, it's really silly to say you want to, say, beat this person or so, as an adult. What does that even mean? That just means that that particular person showed up or didn't show up. That doesn't take away your goal. That's why I like some of these really, longer events, because people are just going in the challenges against themselves. Have they pushed the endurance further than they have pushed it before? Can you suck it up? Are you following your nutrition plan like you've been training, which takes discipline? Are you mentally strong enough to get over these hills when you know you've been cruising for the last 3 hours? Yes, I said it, 3 hours, and all of a sudden the course ends with 3 steep climbs. It's like, well, are you going to fold it in and go, screw it, I've gone this far, but I'm not going to go over those hills, I'm going to quit? So it takes mental endurance, it takes mental toughness, and of course it takes physical toughness. But you've been preparing for that because you've gone out and maybe you've gone longer in your training than the whole course is, so you can do it. But if you've never done it before, or if you've never come close, what in the hell makes you think you're going to be able to do it? I mean, that's just arrogance. And if you do tend to suck it up and get through it, what does that prove? And in a way, it just kind of like, it's a negative reinforcement, because then the next time you'll say, well, I don't need to train. And I just think eventually that's going to catch up to somebody. And, I see it a lot. I mean, there's a lot of DNFs out there, do not finish. And nobody feels good about that. You put a lot of time in the training and you put a lot of money into it. I mean, some of these events are freaking expensive. I'm not a huge fan of the Ironman brand. There's actually a brand of Ironman, meaning that they kind of own the name rights. So I'm not talking about the distance per se. I'm talking about the company. And they're a company. They're out there to make money, and they do, because they know so many people want to be able to say they did their event, and get their little tattoo or whatever. And but they're expensive. I mean, there are people that spend thousands of dollars to go to some of these Ironman sponsored events. Thousands, I'm not kidding you, thousands in the entry fees and in the qualifying events to get in. And that's not even including the travel. That's expensive. And then just to like DNF because maybe they gave more thought on the lottery process of trying to get in and more thought on the economics, and then didn't really remember what it was all about, which was really, really training. And then they weren't prepared for the rough swim because they never trained in rough seas before. They never swam in rough seas. They always swam in the pool, and then they just assume they're going to be able to handle the rough seas. Or maybe they didn't scope out the bike course and see that it was going to be very hilly and hot, and so all their training was done in the flats, and they did it very early in the morning so they didn't have to experience the heat. I mean, I'm not a fan of sending people out in dangerous temperatures, but at the same time, there has to be a happy medium where you have to get ready and acclimated to the heat if you're going to do something like that, especially on the bike, because you typically are riding in those events in the middle of the day and it's freaking hot, and you do have to have some training. If that's not your gig, I get it, but don't prepare, don't do it then, because that's just the way it is. And some people that do these events, well, all of them really are running in the middle of the day, and they could be running 26 miles. And it's like, if you're not used to running at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon when it's super hot, you're going to run into trouble. And again, I'm not saying it's the most ideal thing for health and fitness. I'm just using that as an example of people that are prepared and people that aren't prepared. So you can be as fit as you can be. I mean, you could look at yourself in the mirror and think you're awesome, and you can go out there and run a 5K in this great time and think you're all that, and that's great. But if you're not prepared for one of these things, I don't care who you are. It doesn't matter how fast your natural fitness is. If you're not ready to endure 90-something degree weather and 100% humidity at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and run for 4 hours, I mean, that's training. There's no way around it. You can be a genetic freak and you can have all of those components that make you super aerobically fit, but the race of truth says that, if you're not trained, you're not going to be able to handle it. And I would much rather see everybody go out and get trained. And again, I'm not advocating certain events like that. I'm just saying that that's the way it is. Some of these events are done in different temperatures to try to reduce some of the heat stress. But at the same time, they're out there. And the same is true for altitude. If you've never trained in altitude, what do you think you're doing? I mean, you're only going to be disappointed. So I'm a huge, huge fan of this saying, You got to put the time in. You've got to be mentally tough. You've got to know what you want to do and then train yourself for it. I'm a big believer in long, slow distance training, meaning that, you've got to put in the time, time on your feet. I said it to my group all the time. I'm like, some of them, it's human nature. It's normal to say, my legs are, sore. They're kind of beat up. I can't run fast. I'm like, don't worry about running fast. Just get out the door. Get time on your feet. Like we did, as I talked about, the Rock the Ridge, which was a 50-miler, and we split it up. It just takes time on your feet. I mean, some people walk the hills. Some people run the hills. Some people are running the whole thing. Some people are walking half and half. It doesn't matter. Once you get out there, you kind of develop your own strategies because it varies. But what doesn't change is the fact that you're on your feet for possibly 3 hours. I think the longest leg we had a person out on their feet for 3 hours. If they're not used to being on their feet for 3 hours, and the most that they've done between their walking and running is 2 hours, I can guarantee you that 2 to 3 hour time is going to feel a little bit different. It may not even be manageable for somebody. But if they've been on their feet that long, then they're going to be fine. And the same is true on a bike. People take for granted the things that like cyclists go through all the time that they don't even think about. They're, Lance Armstrong, he looks fit. He's got these great quads. He's lean in the upper body, almost too lean. Like you just see this when he was winning all those Tour de France. You just see this lean machine and you think, the fitness. And absolutely the fitness is there. But anybody that has not been on a bike for 5 hours has no concept what your crotch feels like, okay? I know I just shocked somebody and somebody just spilled their coffee, but it's absolutely true, whether you're a man or a woman. If you're not used to that saddle, it is brutal. You are trying to stand up and try to, take time off the tushy for a little bit of time. You're shifting in your seat. I mean, it's just brutal. And guess what? If you ride long enough in the saddle for hours and hours and hours, eventually you literally callous up a little and you learn your positioning and you're able to handle it. The first time you ride on a road bike like that, you might get 10 miles in and you're already feeling some chafe. I mean, there's literal creams called butt butter and all this kind of stuff. A little plug for a friend of mine that makes, that helps with this stuff. I mean, that's what a real deal this is. So if you're not trained, there are people that like got all the fitness in the world that can ride. Let's just take the Ironman distance again, 112 miles on their bike. Not easily, but they can do it. But maybe they DNF because they have a boil that they can't get past. They got a blister they can't get past. I mean, there are literally Tour de France guys that have to get their cortisone cream cleared so they can ride because they have such bad rash and infections down there. So those are things people don't understand, or your lower back from staying in the position on the bicycle. These are things that people that haven't done it don't understand, that require training. And I don't care how fit you are. If you have not been in the saddle for 5 hours in training, don't think you're going to be able to go do an Ironman and be okay. Because you are not going to have your tushy, your low back, heat, all these things you have to deal with, sunburn, all these things you got to deal with being out there. You're just not going to be trained for it. It's going to be a long day. And on the swim, it's the same thing. People don't really understand, are you okay with taking all kinds of salt water in the mouth for a long time? Are you okay with trying to get over breakers and waves? I mean, it's very different. It's not just about fitness. It's about putting in the time and overcoming a lot of different challenges in training that you've seen. That way, when you're ready to race, you look at that and you go, yeah, we did that. Well, yeah, we practiced that. We practiced running in and out of the surf on that rough day. So I feel pretty confident about that. Or we practiced swimming in that direction with the waves beating you in the face. So some people isolateral on their breath, meaning they only breathe to one side, and then they get into a race and realize that the race director is sending you in a certain direction and the brake is coming in. So every time you turn your head up, you're getting hit in the face with the wave, and it makes it very hard to breathe. and it really throws you off your game. Well, somebody, a good coach or yourself, should have said, I need to learn how to bilateral breathe so I can breathe to both sides. That way, if I'm sent in a direction, it's rare, but it happens. That way, if I'm sent in a direction where the waves are hitting me in the face, I know how to turn my head to the other direction and I can keep going. These are all things we have to learn and practice in training, and it's not just about our fitness levels. It literally is about the training. Have you practiced your nutrition? People that don't practice using their goos and their gels, which you're going to need in any event over 90 minutes, are going to try some and then have diarrhea out on the course or throw up because they didn't practice those things and they just assumed, well, I've always eaten that, I'm okay. I mean, there are plenty of DNFs, people with gastrointestinal issues. All these things happen. There's no rising up. It's sink down to your level of training. What are you prepared for? And again, the key is you should want to be prepared. That's why we do this, right? That's why we do health and fitness things, because we want to push our bodies to levels they haven't been before, and we want to overcome challenges and barriers. And so there's certain things that so many different people have done that we want to try and challenge ourselves. That's what I think is pretty cool. And so we go and we challenge it, but we want to be ready for it, not cocky. If you go to an event and you say, I 100% know I can do this easily, you probably picked the wrong event. So there has to be a level of excitement involved, But if you go to it and say, this is going to be a challenge, but I'm really, really trained for this. I'm ready. I thought about this. I got advice. Too many times we're so stubborn and we don't ask for help. We should always talk to people. Hey, have you done this? What were things you did? That's all part of being prepared. Being cocky is saying, I'll be fine. Oh, you did it? Well, I can do it better. I mean, athletes like that are absolutely no fun to train. They're like, you almost root for them to fail, to be honest, because you're like, really? I mean, okay. I mean, then why are you doing this? And that's just false arrogance, of course. Cockiness is never confident. It's the absolute opposite of that. That's all ego. So a lot of this is like putting the ego aside and being willing to say, you know what? No, I haven't done that. Yes, I want to do it. And I'm really going to have to train my ass off to do it because it's something I want to do. I don't care what it is. It's something I want to do. You got to put in the work, and I'll wrap this up because I talked about the injury thing. So part of it is stretching too. If you chronically get hurt, you're not ready for what you're doing. I mean, you're overcompensating for something. If you always get hurt, and that's not really the case. Like when you get a freak accident, like Ellen stepped out of the car, that's how she hurt her knee. One of our clients, Little Nick, hurt his knee playing basketball. That's not the case in freak accidents. But if you get a lot of overuse injuries, you're not prepared either. I mean, that says that you are going above and beyond what you're physically capable of doing, and your body's telling you can't do it. So you have to take some ownership in that. And the way that we avoid those things, and that's part of being trained too, because if you're banged up and you're hurt going into an event, you're not going to do as well as you wanted to. So you're letting yourself down in that. So part of that is, did I train myself to not get hurt? Did I make sure I did my stretching on my off days that I should do because I have certain tight muscles that lead to this problem? Did I make sure that I ramp up slowly? My coach said only increase 10% per week. And well, I'm not going to have enough time. Okay, well then you picked the wrong event. So pick one that you do have enough time to ramp up to 10% per week to do, whatever that might be. And then you're going to be able to complete it. And a lot of times I see people finishing even longer events and they look hobbled. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you're not overly trained and prepared then. Because there are people that can do certain long events. I saw people do the Rock the Ridge all by themselves, the 50 miler, and they're walking around just fine afterwards, And I'm not saying, oh, they're better than everybody. No, but I am saying that they were so prepared for that event that when they did the 50 miles because they paced themselves or however they did it, they weren't completely beat up afterwards. They were a little sore and tired, but they weren't beat up. They weren't limping. They weren't hobbled. Some people had awful chafes. Some people had, all kinds of, like I said, it's not just about the training sometimes. It's about holding our backpacks and all these things we do. Some people did it all wrong. They had these horrible chafe marks that look like they're going to be sore for a month. We all make mistakes. I'm not ragging on them. It's just that is a part of training. So we want to be able to finish these events and then go on to another. If we're always super sore and tired after training, we are overdoing it. We're doing more than our body can handle at the time, and we need to ramp it up a little bit slower because, again, the idea is to be healthy and fit and not chronically beat up all the time. And again, that's the discipline of a good tortoise who is always prepared and sinks to their level. That tortoise says, man, we see these turtles all the time out on the trail, all right? And I don't know where, yes, they move slow, but, I don't know if they move, to tell you the truth, but I'm going to pretend they do, okay? So we see them all the time, and they're super, super cool. And it's like, let's just pretend that little turtle's out there. And he says, you know what? I'm going to go from this end of the trail to the other, and it's 70 miles, and it's going to take me my whole life, but I'm going to do it. Okay, that tortoise is going to get there. I know that sounded really, really silly, but I think you get my point, and I just wanted to throw the turtles in there because they're super cool. But we all know the story of the tortoise and the hare, right? So it's going to train, it's going to take its time, it's going to rely, and it's going to, confidently, faithfully fall back and go, I got this. And the hare might be all confident, cocky, whatever, jump out to an early lead, and then falter because it's just not trained to go the distance, okay? See, I finally figured out a way to ramp that in and make it make sense. So just remember that. That is our thought for the day, and I really hope the thought for the week. We do not rise up to the occasion. Remember that. We don't. We sink to our level of training. I was going to wrap it up, but I did forget this. I was thinking about this when I was training this morning. I'm a huge Beatles fan, and I'm learning how to play piano, and it's like, I'm very new at it, but it's very fun. And my instructor, Natalie, is awesome. We work remotely, and she always says muscle memory. But think about the musician that goes, I'm going to rise up to the occasion, but they're not putting in the work, right? Think of Paul McCartney, which is, I'm going to go see him next week. Phenomenal songwriter, phenomenal piano player, phenomenal bass guitar player, right? He plays every instrument, but the piano and bass are what he's known for instrument-wise. The amount of hours that he puts in before he goes out and cranks out Let It Be. Oh man, he rose to the occasion. He knew he's playing Orlando, and he just rose to the occasion. It's like, no, you idiot. He's been doing it for so long. He is so trained. He can play the song, I'm absolutely sure, half asleep with his eyes closed. He is so trained because he loves what he does, and he puts in the work and he puts in the time. And that's true for all these musicians. Sure, they get some level of excitement, and all of a sudden, maybe they put on a show that is even better than they normally do. Sure, but we're seeing their greatness because of the time that they put in. They're all talented, but the time they put in preparation. I heard Nikki Sixx, who's totally different type of musician than Paul McCartney. He's the founder of Motley Crue, and I forget his real name. It's Frankie something, but I read his book, and he was even talking about, I shouldn't say it like that. He's a very talented musician, just to kind of, everybody thinks of guys like that as being like, drug heads and all this. And truth be told, he's actually recovered, and he, is actually has an amazing story. But anyway, that's why I was reading his book. But he was talking about how he puts in, as soon as they know they're touring, he writes the set list because he's the leader of the band, and he puts in 2.5 hours a day, or I think it's 6 days a week, and he gives himself 1 day off, of working out to the set list. So he's so prepared for it. Like literally, he's also practicing his skill, of course, but he works out to it because he says it's so physically demanding on stage, and their concerts are usually 2.5 hours. So he literally works out to the set list. So if they have a super fast song like Wild Side, whatever, like he's going to be like cranking up the treadmill, he said, to a fast speed, and getting used to that. And then if they slow it down and play a slower song, he cranks the treadmill down and more walks or jogs or something like that. but he physically prepares working out because he doesn't want to get on stage and be out of breath, because then he can't perform as well. So the preparation these guys do, when we just think, oh, they just get up there and wing it, it's not the case. These guys are great for a reason. Whatever the genre you want to pick of music, whatever the athlete you want to pick, they're so freaking prepared. We can learn a lot from them. So they don't rise to the occasion when they're the Beatles playing at Shea Stadium. They've been practicing. Rumor has it that when the Beatles were 15 years old, when they were young kids, and George Harrison was only 14 years old and the rest of them were 15 and Lennon was 16, that they would put on 8-hour concerts in Hamburg in Germany. 8 hours, because that's what it took to get up to the level they wanted to get at and get seen in London and Liverpool and all that. So they were just kids. And so by the time they came here in their early 20s to play at Shea Stadium, everybody's like, oh man, they blew the place up. It's like, how long they've been preparing for those moments. They didn't rise to the occasion. That's just who they were. They sunk to their level of training. All right. So until next time, be max fit and be max well.